Hi guys, welcome to another lesson. This is lesson 3 for Automate Infrastructure on Azure Cloud using Terraform. In this lesson, I will show you how to deploy Windows Virtual Machine and configure this virtual machine as domain controller. Let's see the diagram for this demo. In this diagram, we will create Windows Virtual Machine. The name of this VM is DC. And we need to configure this VM as domain. The name of the domain is solitech.com. This VM needs 4 requirements. Number 1 is network interface. Number 2 is public IP address. Number 3 is virtual network. In this demo, we will use virtual network Terraform-VNet1. This virtual network we created in lesson 2. Number 4 is network security group. Let's see how to create code for this demo. Open Visual Studio Code. Open the folder for the demo. You will see the 3 files for Terraform configuration inside this folder. I created these files, and I will explain everything inside it. Let's look for Providers file first. Here, you can see we are using Azure Cloud as provider with HashiCorp. We use Azure RM, as RM means Resource Manager, and inside it, you must put your subscription ID and tenant ID. Let's look for Variables file. The first variable is the virtual machine name, which is DC. The second variable is NIC name, and this is related to VM's NIC. The third variable is public IP name. This is related to VM's public IP. The fourth variable is NSG name. This is related to VM's network security group. The fifth variable is username. This is related to administrator account. The sixth variable is password. This is related to administrator account password. Now, let's explain code inside main file. First thing is define which resource group for VM we'll deploy in. In our case, we are using resource group Terraform RG, and this was created in lesson 1. Data Azure resource group means that you tell Terraform configuration that find resource group Terraform RG and use the name and location for it. The same thing is to define the virtual network and subnet that the VM will connect to. In our case, we are using virtual network Terraform-VNet1 and subnet X0. This were created in lesson 2. Data Azure RM virtual network and Azure RM subnet means that you tell Terraform configuration that find virtual network Terraform-VNet1 with subnet X0 and use it. In Data Azure RM Virtual Network, we define the resource group name for the VNet, so we are using data.azurerm_rg.name. And in Data Azure RM Subnet, we define subnet name, VNet name, and RG name. Now, let's create public IPs. To create public IP, you must write resource Azure RM_public IP and give name to this RM. Here I used public IP. You can use any name for RM, for example, IP1. Open curly brackets. Inside it, you need to define public IP name, so write var.publicip-name. Then define the location and resource group name that it will create it in, so we are using data.azurerm_resourcegroup.rg.location for location and data.azurerm_resourcegroup.name. This means that use Terraform RG resource group and use this resource group location to deploy public IP. Then, define the allocation method for public IP if you need static or dynamic. Here in our demo, we are using static. Now, let's create network interface for VM. To create network interface, you must write resource Azure RM network_interface and give name to this RM. Here, I used NIC-VM. Open curly brackets. Inside it, you need to define network interface name, so write var.nic name. Do the same for location and resource group name that we did in public IPs. Now you need to configure the IP by using IP_configuration. Then open curly brackets. Inside it, you must define IP configuration name. Here I'm using dcconfig. Then select the subnet ID, so we'll use .azure_rm subnet.x0 subnet.id. Then is this primary IP or secondary IP? Here we defined it as primary. This is new. Then put the IP address and make the allocation as static. Then define IP address version if it's IP version 4 or IP version 6. Then attach the public IP we created before to this configuration. Now, let's create network security group and rules. To create network security group and rules, you must write resource Azure RM network security group and give name to this RM. Here, I used DCNSG. Open curly brackets. Inside it, you need to define network security group name, so write var.nsg name. Do the same for location and resource group name that we did in network interface. Now, you need to create rule to allow RDP by using security rule, then open curly brackets. Inside it, you must define rule name. Here, I'm using RDP. Then give the select the priority to 1000. Then define the direction. In this case, we are using inbound as you want to allow RDP to this VM. Then define rule if allow or block. Here, we're using allow. Then define destination port range, and the port for RDP is 3389. Next step is connect the security group to the network interface. You can do this by write resource Azure RM network_interface_security group association and give RM name, then open curly bracket. Inside it, define the network interface ID. We will use Azure RM network interface.nic-vm.id. And define network security group ID, so we will use Azure RM network security group.dcnsg.id. The code means that DCNIC connect to network security group DCNSG. Next step is create DC virtual machine. You can do this by write resource Azure RM Windows virtual machine and give RM name. If you need to create Linux VM, so you will use Azure RM Linux virtual machine, or use Azure RM virtual machine and define the OS later in configuration. Then open curly bracket. Inside it, define the VM name. We will use var.vmname. Then define location and resource group as we did in other configurations. Then define network interface that was created before. Then define the VM size, username, and password. Then define what OS version you need. Here, we will use Windows Server 2019 latest version. Then configure the OS disk by defining the name of disk, size, here we're using 127 GB, and storage type, if standard or premium, and if it's LRS, ZRS, or GRS. Here, we are using standard LRS with read-write caching. Now, the final step after create the VM is to configure as domain controller. How we can do that? This can do by use Azure RM Virtual Machine extension. This extension is used to run PowerShell command to install Active Directory domain services, then promote server to domain controller. So write resource Azure RM Virtual Machine extension and give name for this RM as DC Server Install. Then open curly brackets. Inside curly brackets, define the name of the extension. Here I am using Install DC. Then define the VM that this extension will run in it. So we will use Azure RM Windows Virtual Machine.dc.id. Then use the publisher for PowerShell. We will use Microsoft.compute. Then define the type of this extension. Use, in this case, custom script extension. Then define the settings. This settings means the script or command that will execute. Here, we are using command to execute. What command you want to execute? Here, it's PowerShell. So type PowerShell, then write command install-Windows feature AD-domain services. You need to run another command after this, so put semicolon, then write command install-adds forest-domain name and put your domain. In our demo, we are using solitech.com. Then -install DNS with safe mode administrator password and put your password. By this all configuration code, you will create the VM and configure it as domain controller. Now run this Terraform configuration as I show you in previous lessons, then see the results. This is the end of Lesson 3. In the next lesson, I will show you how to create Nginx Linux virtual machine and install Nginx while VM creating. If you like this lessons, like, share, and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you in Lesson 4.